So, has Star Wars Episode 1 Phantom Menace aged well? I think the best way for me to approach this is to talk about it through a couple of experiences I've had watching the movie at different points in my life. And it's important to do that because I think it'll make what I'm about to say much clearer. Or it's going to turn everything upside down. The circumstances surrounding us when we watch a movie matter. And sometimes they don't just matter, they can be huge. If you saw a movie when someone you love was breaking up with you, well, who needs that movie? I went to see Moonstruck with friends in 7th grade, and by the end of the movie, one of those friends ended up in the back of a police car. True story. Changed my perception of the name Moonstruck forever. The point is, whether it's fair or not, I think the how, when, and where we see a movie can have a significant role in how we perceive it. So, way back in 1999, before smartphones, before Twitter, before YouTube, before COVID, before 9/11, Phantom Menace comes out. Now, there's probably all different kinds of Star Wars fans. There's people who just love it, and there's people who dress up as Darth Vader at conventions. The latter is not me, but I still love the saga. And I think a lot of it has to do with nostalgia. It reminds me of being a child and discovering all of these things. A lot of the things that Joseph Campbell or George Lucas or whoever think are so important came through to me through these characters. So it's whatever the pie chart is, some of it's about the movies themselves and what happens, and some of it's about the messages behind it. That's a very nerdy way of saying that when Phantom Menace came out, I could not believe that Star Wars was coming back. So my friend and I go to opening night, and it's packed, of course. The excitement is in the air. The energy you can feel all around you. When the opening credits start up, everyone screams. They can't believe it's happening. By the end of the movie, the whole audience is shuffling out in silence. I think a lot of people were disappointed, and a lot of people didn't know what to make of it, or maybe they were in shock. They didn't really think that it was possible that they wouldn't like a Star Wars movie as much as they didn't like this one. Even if they thought it was okay, the expectation level was so high, there's no way it could have lived up to those expectations. I can remember then seeing Attack of the Clones and being disappointed as well, because it had already been set in that direction. And I didn't even see Revenge of the Sith in the theaters. I saw it on TV or something a few years later. So my initial viewing was one of disappointment. I thought, other than Darth Maul, I thought it was a complete debacle. Fast forward many years later to the early Pandy days, and since I've already watched everything on streaming early that year anyway, I'm going to watch all Star Wars films from beginning to end. All of them in order, 1 until whatever, 11. This time, though, my experience was very different. But it did start out the same. I remember watching the first 30 minutes of Phantom Menace, shaking my head, pausing it, going to the store or something, getting some food, and thinking, I was right. It's terrible. It's boring. It's not moving. But when I came back and hit play and watched the rest of Phantom Menace and the other 2 films, by the end of watching all 3 of them, blown away. Blown away at how great I thought they were as a package, how great I felt about it. I was actually emotional after finishing Revenge of the Sith. And I remember telling people about it, and them saying, no, that can't be. I haven't seen him in a long time, but you must have been stoned or something, because that's not what I remember. Now, we'll just stick to Phantom Menace here, but the reason I want to mention all 3 of them as like a package is because it's important if you want to understand, I think, what Phantom Menace actually is. Because I think Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith are great. You heard me. They're great. I think one of the reasons that they're great is because of what Phantom Menace does. Now, did I think Phantom Menace was a great movie after this second experience? No. I thought it was a decent movie with some great moments, but it set up the other 2 really well. So when I go back and hit play and watch the rest of Phantom Menace, one of the big things that I notice is how I don't remember things correctly. My memory from the opening of Phantom Menace in 1999 was that the pod race took forever, the little kid was terrible, nothing happens outside of Darth Maul, and I was wrong. Now, I do think that the beginning struggles, and I think that he's sort of clunky. And I think Jar Jar Binks is still a terrible idea, but we're going to move on from that. But I think in addition to the way that it plays its role by setting up the other two, I think there's some really highly charged emotional moments that you get, not just when Anakin is leaving his mom, but also when the fight between Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan is so fantastic. But it's the emotion that Obi-Wan displays in seeing his master fall at the hands of Darth Maul, and then obviously killing Darth Maul. It gives you, it's a little bit of foreshadowing at how great Obi-Wan is. It's the first time we see him in action in that kind of way. And by the time you get to the end of the trilogy, it's almost like a 9-hour movie. If you think of it as a 9-hour movie, you might think the first few hours are good, but they're not great. But then by the time you get to the end of it overall, I think that's how I have to think of Phantom Menace, as a role player, because that's what it's doing. It has a role. Was it super successful at the role? No, it didn't have, it had lacked some artistic qualities. It lacked some humor. It made some bad choices with certain characters, and things could have been better, sure, but it does succeed, I think, at setting up the other two. So fast forward to a re-release in the theaters on the 25th anniversary in 2024. I'm the only one in the theater watching it. I'm not sure why. But the question remains, and that question will always be there for any movie, I suppose. Has it aged well? And I think that it has. I think the key thing in that viewing is that I was reminded of its role in the trilogy. I think that's so important. But also there were other things that I caught on that experience that I hadn't caught even during the Pandy viewing. For example, there's a few moments that I hadn't caught before where Qui-Gon is telling Anakin about midichlorians because he's asking, and he says, your focus becomes your reality. And Anakin is still asking questions, and he says, well, they live inside of us. I think us, he means Jedis. And he says, we kind of live in harmony with them, and the more you can quiet your mind, the more you can hear them speak. I thought that was brilliant, and it felt straight out of Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now, like being in the present. And that's not the first time in that movie that he mentions or suggests that people be present and be in the moment. So it has flaws, for sure. But I think it has aged well, and I think as part of the package, you could do better, but they didn't, so there's no reason in thinking about it too much. I think of it as a role player even more than I did before. I don't really understand the low 50% score on Rotten Tomatoes by critics and fans. That seems a little harsh to me. There's definitely people who just flat out don't like it, and it doesn't make them wrong. But I do think that there's a percentage of the people who don't like it who have a grudge hold still, or they haven't seen it in a while. And so watching it again and seeing it in the context of maybe not the whole saga, but the first 3 movies, I think is important if you're going to look at it. I think it's fair to put it in that context, because I think it also makes it better. So on its own, it's a good movie, but if you think of it as a role player, it is a sacrifice bunt moving the runner over in a way. And in that way, at least, it is a success because it sets up the next 2 films, which are total home runs.